Good afternoon, everybody. Little introduction of Jay Finch. Jay and his wife Bonnie are relatively new residents of Tide Point, having moved here this past February. Jay was born and raised in the Pittsburgh area and is a most ardent Steeler fan. His career has band engineering, law, and business management. Jay holds degrees from Rensselaer Polytech Institute in chemical engineering and Duquesne University Law School. He will give us a look at the plastic industry with a few laughs along the way. And now, as Ed McMahon used to say, here's Jay!
Thank you very much, Lee. Does the sound okay for the folks in the back? Okay. You've probably noticed, as I have, that there's no fee or upcharge for attending Tide Point Talks. It's not like Wine Down Wednesday or Super Bowl party or Kentucky Derby party. You've paid absolutely nothing to come here this afternoon, and I intend to give you your money's worth. You may have noticed, and I'm speaking particularly to the newcomers now, the new residents, there is a part of your Tide Point app on your devices labeled Tide Point Videos. If you go to that section and scroll down almost to the bottom, you will find 15 or so archived videos in reverse chronological order. The newest one is first. These go back about 2 years, but if you look at these, you'll find out that we have many, many interesting residents who have amazing stories to tell, and I recommend these to your attention. I'd also suggest that we can always use volunteer speakers. The people I've talked to here, they're people with fantastic stories. And believe me, if I can get up here and do this, you can too. So I'd like to see you voluntarily. We need speakers for October and later. You'll enjoy it, believe me. I went through all of the Tide Point talks. I audited every one of them. And I can tell you that of all the talks, mine will be the least serious. When I do come up with a serious point, I will give you adequate pre-warning. And now here's the first one, something serious. My wife Bonnie and I moved here about 6 months ago, and we would like to thank all the residents and particularly all the staff for the welcoming and supportive environment that we've enjoyed. I'd like to give a particular, we intend to become productive members of this community, and we appreciate everything that's been done thus far. I'd like to give a particular shout out to 5 members of the staff here: Joe, Tyrone, Phyllis, Victoria, and Geraldine. These folks have found me when I've been lost. They've directed me to where I should go. They've escorted me to get there. They've picked me up and patched me up when I've fallen down, and they've shown me that the broccoli is at the 2 o'clock position on my dinner plate. And they've had the discretion not to say anything when I've refused to eat it. Okay, let's have some fun. First slide, please. As Lee mentioned, I was born in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania in 1941. Yes, I've always weighed 165 pounds since birth. I'm not quite sure why the scowl is on my face. I think someone just took my bowl of Chef Jim's coffee ice cream. I'm not sure. I was baptized with the name James Roland Finch. I go by Roland, which was my father's name. And my father and mother nicknamed me Jay rather than call me Roland Jr. There were plenty of juniors in the family and plenty of Jims in the family, so I got Jay. Next picture, please. This is my family. I'm on the left. You see my mother, my father, and my younger sister, Sue. My mother was a registered nurse and a very good swimmer. She swam and lost a challenge race against Gertrude Ederle, the first woman to swim the English Channel, when Gertrude Ederle was doing a victory tour of the United States in the early 1930s. My father was a Union man, a Democrat, who believed that Franklin Delano Roosevelt could walk on water. Both of my parents had great senses of humor. Shortly after this picture was taken, they went on their first vacation since I was born. They took a motor trip to Florida. And while they were there, they went to Hialeah Racetrack. My father, who was a frugal conservative, because we didn't have much to be conservative about, looked at the race program and saw that in a feature race, an odds-on favorite named Hey Jay was running. So he placed a $20 bet on the horse. And Hey Jay led from wire almost to wire. He was nosed out by a 100-to-1 long shot named Origeron. When my father and mother came home to Pittsburgh, my sister and I greeted them warmly. Then my father and mother took me aside and very seriously said to me, "Son, if we would have nicknamed you Origeron, we'd all be wealthy today." I'm fortunate to have been the first member of my family to receive a college degree. But my father, at age 82, entered Allegheny County Community College as a freshman. He was taking a course in American history, and he got all A's. And when the course ended, his 18-year-old fellow students said, "Mr. Finch, what are your study techniques? How did you do this?" My dad said, "For you folks, this is a college history course. For me, it's more of a current events discussion." I got a puzzle at the age of 9. You folks have probably had one. It was a puzzle of the 48 states of the United States in little cardboard pieces, different colors. Unfortunately, when I was playing with my sister over our furnace grate at age 9, I dropped South Carolina down into the coal-fired furnace. To this day, I don't know what the state bird, the state flower, the state industry, the state capital is, but I do know the shape of the state. It's like an uneven diamond. I looked at it for years. I went to high school at Bethel, now called Bethel Park, a southern suburb of Pittsburgh. At an adjacent high school later, Maggie Posey and Jeannie Bellinger, both residents here, were teachers, and Maggie became actually the principal of the high school. This is all in the archived videos. You should see some of this stuff. In high school, when I was a sophomore, the Soviets launched Sputnik. And all of a sudden, it became necessary that if you had any patriotic blood in your veins, you were destined to try to catch the Russians by becoming a scientist or an engineer. So I decided to become a chemical engineer in college. On April 1st, April Fool's Day, 1959, my senior year, I received the only telegram of my life telling me that I had just been awarded a full tuition scholarship to any college that would accept me. I thought it was a prank by my high school buddies, so I didn't say anything for 4 days. But through the U.S. mails came a letter from General Motors Corporation saying, yes, indeed, I had won a scholarship, full tuition, any place I could get in. I looked at 3 schools. Carnegie Tech was in Pittsburgh, and both my parents and I felt that wasn't a good idea to stay home and go to college. I looked at MIT, where my cousin Jimmy was going and not having a whole lot of fun. And I looked at Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute in Troy, New York. The drinking age in Troy was 18. The drinking age in Pennsylvania and Massachusetts was 21. I was somewhat swayed by this factor. When I got to RPI, I found out that it was the oldest technological university in the United States, founded in 1824. It had many famous engineering graduates. For example, the Roeblings, father and son, who designed and built the Brooklyn Bridge and many of the other large suspension bridges in the late 19th century. George Ferris, who invented the Ferris wheel for the Columbian Exposition in 1893, and my own classmate, a fellow named Ray Tomlinson, who invented email. Now, some of you may think that Al Gore invented email. He didn't. Ray Tomlinson did. You can Google him. At Rensselaer, I played football and baseball. Our football team was underweight, underfed. We ate the same mystery meat in the same proportions as the rest of the student body. We were under-talented and undercoached and unwinning, but we had a great football cheer. I'm going to ask you to reach back in your hard drives now and retrieve all of your high school mathematics, from trigonometry to plane geometry to algebra. I'll give you 3 seconds. Okay, here we go. Cosine, secant, tangent, sine, 3.14159. Square root, cube root, log of pi, disintegrate them, RPI. Carnegie Tech also had a pretty good cheer. Theirs went, apathy, apathy is our cry. APA, oh, the hell with it. Next slide, please. While at RPI, I joined a fraternity, and this is my fraternity house. You may recognize the building. It has recently appeared in the HBO miniseries, The Gilded Age. It's a Victorian, Romanesque, Gothic structure built in 1896. It was also featured in the 1985 movie Age of Innocence, which starred Michelle Pfeiffer and Daniel Day-Lewis. Exterior and interior shots of this beautiful building are in both movies. If you'd like to see more of it, it has stained glass windows on the inside, wooden parquet floors, artwork in the ceilings, wonderful decorative molding. There's a website I can recommend you to, Payne Castle, PIANECASTLE, one word.com. You'll be able to take a tour through it. It's a fantastic place. It's been a fraternity house since 1954, and because of that, it hasn't been subdivided or razed. It still exists and is in good shape. While there, I was social chairman. RPI was a work hard and play harder school. We had 3,000 undergraduates, only 2 of whom were women. On the weekends, when I was social chairman, in my junior year, on 36 weekends, we had 13 rock and roll bands in the house. We paid for every party and then some by selling beer over the counter to students and the occasional faculty member who'd stop in. We not only paid for the bands, we also subsidized our house board bill, and we had lobster tails occasionally on Sunday nights. As the Limelighters sang, those were the days, my friends, those were the days. In 4 years, I earned my degree in chemical engineering. Next picture, please. And here I was in June of 1963, ready to take on the world. I took my first job as a chemical engineer. I'm sorry?
Yeah, before that, you want to talk about you went to New York?
No, not yet. Oh, I'm sorry. Oh, geez, yeah. Thank you very much. That's my wife with the prompter down here in the first row. Thanks. I'm sorry. While I was at Rensselaer in my sophomore year, the school got an invitation from CBS TV to send a team to a quiz program on Sunday evening called the GE College Bowl. Some of you may remember it. It was a lot like Jeopardy in that you got questions on general knowledge, but unlike Jeopardy, you didn't play as individuals, you played as 2 four-man teams representing 2 different universities. Also, you didn't get to choose the category. The questions could come from any category. I took a test and tried out with 32 other students, and I was chosen as one of 4 members to represent RPI on this show. We went to New York City on a Friday night. As a 19-year-old, never having visited the Big Apple, this was pretty heady stuff. They gave me $50 in spending money, and I took a date to a French restaurant with an all-French menu, and I was totally lost. We then went to see My Fair Lady. We had first-row seats in the first balcony. I was looking down on the semi-bald head of Rex Harrison as he played Professor Higgins. It was really something. The next morning I got up and walked to 51st and Broadway where the studio was. The giant studio that featured the Ed Sullivan Show on Sunday night was next door. Ours was a small studio which did not sit an audience. The show was filmed without an audience. But I walked in and met the show's host, Alan Ludden, who was also the moderator. He sat us down, introduced us to the opposite team. The incumbent winners were the University of Indiana. And we went through 3 different practice rounds. Next picture, please. Oh, okay. And I think you see me and my team here, right? Yeah. Me and my teammates. We look rather glum. This picture was taken just after the dress rehearsal. We lost 3 straight rehearsal matches, each 1/2 hour long, to get us used to the pace of the show, the simulated speed with which you had to answer questions. Basically, it was like Jeopardy. A toss-up question would be thrown. You hit the buzzer as fast as you can, answer the question, and if you get it right, you get a bonus question, which your whole team can then take their time in answering. So after 3 successive dress rehearsals, we hadn't won a single thing. But when the real show started, we huddled and we said to each other, even though our faculty doesn't think we have a chance, and our student body can't believe we're here, and our professor has tried to plug the holes in our knowledge by giving us, each of us, specific things to learn. In my case, it was all sports from Olympic fencing to sumo wrestling, the American presidents, and Greek, Roman, and Norse mythology, in addition to my regular engineering courses. Well, once the show started, we decided to throw caution to the winds and just ring the buzzer whenever we thought we might have an answer. We jumped off to an early lead, and we were never caught. We won the show. At the end of the show, the professor who coached the Indiana team would not come over and shake our hands. He had been convinced that we'd been playing head games with him during the entire rehearsal period, and we had it in the bag. That was not the case. In the subsequent 4 weeks, we defeated Grinnell College from Iowa, Fisk College from Nashville, Tennessee, Fordham University from New York. I take my hat off to John Brink, to Bingo Bob Schreiger, and to any other Fordham Rams in the audience. Fordham gave us the closest match of the 5. And finally, we beat the University of Connecticut. Next picture. At the end, we were given a giant silver bowl by the moderator of the show, Alan Ludden, and I think you can see him on the right. Next picture, please. 4 years later, I was on business in Columbus, Ohio, and Alan Ludden was starring in a Broadway production of Bell, Book, and Candle. I watched the show, and after the show, I went backstage to greet him. I greeted him, told him who I was. He told a white lie and said, "Oh, sure, I remember you." Meanwhile, he'd had 200 other collegians on the show. And then he said, "Let me introduce you to my wife," who turned out to be Betty White, his co-star in the show. She was a warm and wonderful person, very extroverted, much like her TV persona. We had a wonderful conversation. She was just top-notch. And in her autobiography, published about 3 years ago, just before she passed away, she wrote that Alan Ludden was the love of her life. They were married 15 years before he died a premature death, but they were wonderful people, really, really enjoyable. Okay, next picture. Yes, finally I get to graduate from college, right? Yep. There I am in a mortarboard. This was spring of 1963, and I was ready to take on the world. I took a job as an engineer with the Columbia Gas System based in Pittsburgh. This was a gas network that served natural gas to Pennsylvania and parts of New York, Ohio, West Virginia, and Maryland. I was given the job that people today would call operations research. My job was to take a look at the whole system and see if we could optimize it in some way, usually by mathematical modeling. So the first thing I looked at was, how do we determine how much gas customers need the next day? The answer is, we look at the forecast from the U.S. Weather Bureau. At noon, we looked at the forecast for the following 24 hours beginning at midnight. We would take the high temperature and the low temperature and average them, and that would be the temperature we'd assume that we had to meet with natural gas. Big problem, folks. you've probably noticed that the Weather Bureau is frequently wrong. How wrong are they? Well, I analyzed data for 25 years from 1938 to 1963 and found out that 34% of the time they were wrong by 4 degrees or more. 10% of the time they were wrong by 8 degrees or more. Now here we have our gas dispatchers trying to figure out, okay, I've got so much gas coming from Louisiana and Texas through a big pipeline every day. I've got gas in underground storage fields that I can withdraw anytime I want. I've got industrial customers who I can cut off the line because I give them a lower rate. I can force them to take fuel oil and burn it in their steel furnaces for a day if I want. Or I could even mix liquefied propane and air like we do here at Hilton Head and burn it. Very expensive. All different priced options, and I'm going to base that on weather forecasts. Well, I decided to get a better weather forecast and found that AccuWeather in State College, PA, did a much better job. They had gained street cred by correctly forecasting a hard freeze in Central Florida the prior winter. We were the first corporate client they had, but we took their weather forecast for Pittsburgh, Binghamton, New York, and Cumberland, Maryland, and greatly increased our forecast accuracy. I also put together a program that allowed a new dispatcher to go through a simulated winter from November 1st to April 30th, taking 1 day per minute to make decisions on what to do. Of course, he didn't know that the weather forecast was going to be wrong or how wrong it was going to be. But at the end of the year, he could see how many mistakes he made versus the computer. And it was a very good training tool for new dispatchers. The old dispatchers didn't want to touch it with a 10-foot pole because what it revealed was their biases developed over the years to actually draw on non-optimal gas sources. Interesting exercise. While I was doing that, I decided to go to law school in the evening. I went to Duquesne University at night for 4 years. To get a law degree normally took 3 years in the daytime, so it was a pretty busy schedule at night after working all day. And while that was going on, next picture please, I courted and married my wife, Bonnie Butler, who was an Army brat born at Fort Hunter here in Savannah and raised at a number of Army bases around the country. Her father's a retired general. We married in 1966. We have 3 adult children, all with successful careers, a Wall Street marketer, an interventional radiologist / surgeon, and a computer artist. They've given us 3 wonderful grandsons, ages 14, 11, and 11, who are a constant source of enjoyment to us. After I gained my law degree in 1968, I worked for the gas company as a corporate lawyer for 2 years and then transferred over to a chemical company in Pittsburgh and worked as a corporate lawyer for 6 years. I handled everything they had except patent and trademark work, and I was their only attorney. One of the clients I had was the vice president of the company's largest division, who after 6 years asked me if I would like to join him in his business. I didn't feel I knew anything about that, but I decided to seek advice, so I pulled down my Martindale-Hubbell legal directory, which a lot of you guys have used. I found 3 lawyers around the country who had made similar moves in the prior 12 months, and I called all 3 of them and said, I need some free advice. They helped me greatly. The best one was a fellow in Oakland, California, who said, Jay, the difference between the practice of corporate law and running a business is that in business, the emotional highs are higher, the emotional lows are lower, and you get a report card every 30 days. He was absolutely right. The 2 largest cases I had dragged on for 3 and 4 years, respectively. So I decided to join him in the business. Excuse me, just to get a drink of water here. I decided to join his unit, the polyurethane division, in the chemical business. I started out by trying to model the demand for our products. At the time, there was a fad in industry. It later became known as chaos theory. But the idea was that sometimes small events could have major consequences if you just tilted the right dominoes in the right order. And I studied things like housing starts on the theory that 6 months later, that would give us a home that needed carpet underlay, living room furniture, bedroom mattresses, and eventually an automobile with a car seat, all of which required polyurethane foam and therefore created demand for our chemicals. But I could never get it refined far enough to be able to adjust our inventories in the short term with demand. However, I noticed that a lot of corporations were having some success, and I learned a little bit about chaos theory. It turned out that 2 of our corporate divisions had invented new products. The agricultural chemicals division had invented a herbicide for pre-emergent weeds in soybeans. You'd use this herbicide and you'd increase your soybean yield. The second division that made dyestuffs had invented a new dyestuff that would adhere to the very fine, under a microscope, glass-like polyester fiber. So both general managers of those divisions were predicting great things for their product. Meanwhile, in the Central Pacific Ocean, climatologists discovered for the first time the weather phenomenon known as El Nino. In El Nino, you have warm water currents at the surface of the ocean that affect all the currents in the Pacific Ocean and actually affect the depth at which the currents flow. So that up the west coast of South America, from Antarctica, there comes a cold water current called the Humboldt Current, and it carries all the anchovies in it. The Peruvian fishermen had their nets set at the wrong level, the traditional level for that current. It flowed underneath their nets, and they missed the anchovy catch. This created a protein deficiency in South America, and they began chopping down Amazonian rainforest to plant soybeans. And because we had the herbicide that would increase your soybean yield, we were selling all we could make. Meanwhile, farmers in Mississippi and Alabama note that the price of soybeans is rising. So they decide to plant soybeans instead of cotton. They want more pre-emergent herbicide, so they're buying all they can get. Meanwhile, the price of cotton starts to rise because not enough of it's being planted, and polyester becomes competitive with cotton for casual clothing, and we've got the only dyestuffs that will adhere to the polyester fabric. 2 years later, I approached both these general managers and told them, you guys really ought to have some humility. It wasn't your marketing genius that created all these sales. It was the humble Peruvian anchovy. Give them credit. Well, after all that exercise, I was sent to California to head the polyurethane division. This consisted of 5 plants that created polyurethane foam. Next picture, please. I think here you see some polyurethane foam buns stacked on top of each other. Am I right, Bonnie?
Yes.
Right? Okay. Polyurethane is foamed by an ejector nozzle spitting out a cocktail of between 5 and 8 liquid chemicals. They spit it out in a 2-inch thick layer onto a moving conveyor belt. The conveyor is 6 feet wide and 4 feet high. And as the conveyor moves away from this spitting nozzle, the foam layer begins to chemically react and rise, just like a loaf of bread in your oven being baked. At the end of 2 minutes, and about 70 feet down the line, the foam is fully risen to a height of about 4 feet. It's now 6 feet wide and infinitely long because we keep making it and making it and making it. At the end of that conveyor belt, a cutoff saw is cutting the foam off in 200-foot lengths.
What are you doing? 5:30.
So imagine you've got a
You got me? Late. 5:30. 5:30.
Okay. So imagine you've got a 200-foot long bun of polyurethane that's 6 feet wide and 4 feet high. 200 feet weighs about as much as the average 4-door sedan. We have a giant crane that squeezes this bun on the sides and picks it up and lifts it over a wall and stores it in a warehouse over here. The warehouse The cold buns are stored as you see them here, but the hot ones, the ones that are just poured, we move all the way to the west end of the warehouse and put them down at the far wall, right on the floor. And we put a temperature probe in them to make sure that the chemical reaction is not continuing to produce heat, in which case the whole bun would self-ignite and it would burn the plant down. Most of our workforce was Hispanic. 90% of our workers, both our supervisors and our laborers, were Hispanic. It wasn't unusual for a senor and a senorita to decide to have a little tryst on one of the mattresses at the far west side of the warehouse. All they had to do was pay off the overhead crane operator so that he complicitly stayed in the east half of the warehouse. I decided to treat this as an unpublicized employee benefit rather than a disciplinary problem. But can you imagine a 15-minute tryst on one of these still hot buns at the far side that could burst into flame at any moment? Talk about spicing up your sex life. Next picture.
Impala.
Should be a 57 Chevrolet, right? Well, in 3 months, I had my first labor negotiation with our union. In the past, as an attorney, I had participated in labor negotiations, but never as the principal who has the power to say yes or no. Our labor union wanted an extra holiday. I asked, well, what day are you thinking about? And they said, well, Jello Chebby Day. I said, Jello Chebby Day? What day of the year is that? I had no idea what they were talking about. And they said, well, it's September 17th. I said, September 17th. So I got out my 3-year calendar and I looked and I saw that September 17th was going to be in the midweek, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, the next 3 years. And I didn't want to close the plant in midweek. So I said, no, we can't do that. How about we give you your birthday? That way we don't have to close the plant at all. We only have to cover 2 or 3 jobs on any given day. They agreed to that. But my curiosity was raised and I said, tell me, what's being celebrated on Jello Chebby Day? And they said, that's the day that General Motors comes out with the new Jello Chevrolets, the yellow Chevy.
The yellow Chevrolets.
This was their favorite car. Well, 4 years went by. My parent corporation in Pittsburgh found that the business in general for them wasn't going too well and they needed cash. My operation was the easiest and quickest one to sell that would produce the most immediate profit. The reason was our biggest plant, and the one I've been talking about, was located on 48 acres in the Irvine Industrial Park. And its value had increased from $4 million in 1969 when we bought the acreage to $22 million 13 years later in 1982 when we decided to sell. So I sold the plant acreage, and now the trick was sell the plant's machinery and the other 4 plants that we owned in Seattle and in Northern California. Next picture, please. So out to visit me came Bob Hay, recent resident here of Tide Point. Bob passed away 2 months ago. Bob was in the same industry I was. He ran a business on the East Coast, headquartered in Providence, Rhode Island. And he probably knew more about the phone business than anybody ever. He came out to see my operations, and so I took him by car up the coast, and we went through the wine country on my way to my plant at the east side of San Francisco Bay. As we were driving along, I saw a sign that said Firestone Winery. So I said to Bob, I said, you're president of Firestone Foam, and I know Firestone Foam is part of Firestone Tire. Do you guys also own Firestone Winery? And Bob says, well, no, not exactly. He said, that winery is owned by a black sheep son of the Firestone family who decided he wanted to grow grapes rather than build tires, so he came out here and started a winery. And I said, well, what's the quality of the wines? Bob said, Jay, you would probably rather chew a Firestone tire than drink a Firestone wine. Well, that was 1982. Today, 40 years later, wine enthusiast rates their Cabernet Sauvignon 91 and Wine Spectator rates it 90. So with the passage of time, things get better. After selling the plant, I moved back to Pittsburgh at the behest of my boss and got into another phase of the plastics business. Next slide, please. Pardon?
All the ones from Cleveland, when you moved to Cleveland, that these are all the 8 ones together in Cleveland.
No. This should be a slide that's got an automotive tail light lens on it.
That-
Oh, okay, and a lot of other things? Okay. So I moved to Pittsburgh and was given responsibility for a much larger unit. My unit in California had been $40 million in sales, 5 plants, and about 400 people. My unit in Pittsburgh was $425 million in sales, about 1,000 people, and 3 large chemical plants. We made a product called polycarbonate. It was a transparent, high-impact plastic that could be used to substitute for metals, both cast metals and sheet metal. It could substitute for wood, it could substitute for glass, it could substitute for aluminum, many, many uses. And so the trick was to find new markets for it. And in a very quick period of time, we found, for example, that automotive taillight lenses could use it because of its transparency and its high impact strength. Next slide, please. Automotive dashboards, now called instrument panels, use it. Next slide, please. This is a medical container, I believe, right, Bonnie? Used in operating rooms. The advantage here is that you don't have the opaque stainless steel or titanium vessels. You can use a transparent plastic through which the medical personnel can see the viscosity and the color of various fluids. A real advantage. Next slide, please. Oh, this is a baby bottle. Here we find an interesting thing. Baby bottles could be made out of this plastic. It's unbreakable. A baby can't break it. And we found that Mexican mothers were a tremendous market because the Mexican women wanted a new set of bottles every time they had a new baby, whereas American mothers just tended to take the old bottles out of the pantry with each new child. Interesting cultural difference. Next picture, please. A baseball bat. In the early 1980s, Louisville Slugger and other makers of baseball bats ran out of white ash, the favorite wood for making baseball bats. So the idea was, how could we come up with a substitute? We tried to replace it with our plastic, but if you've ever tried to hit a ball in February or March, it's like bees right down in your hands. All the impact comes right down into your hands. Wasn't a good idea. Eventually that market went to hollow aluminum. And today, in baseball, all the bats, except those used by professional baseball players, are hollow aluminum. Baseball players now use bats of birch and maple. They don't want to give up the wooden bat. Next picture, please. Safety lenses and even eyeglasses like these were made out of polycarbonate. The lenses can be ground. The only drawback is the surface tends to scratch a little bit, so you have to put an expensive coating on the surface. Next picture. Oh, this was a home run. Compact discs and digital video discs are all made of polycarbonate. Our parent company had worked with Philips, the electronics company in Holland, to develop the compact disc. Because of the high impact strength and the high transparency of our material, when the laser beam goes down and tries to read the pit or the valley in a compact disc, it doesn't get diffracted by any small contaminants, no small pellets, no small bad black marks. So we got the market. Next picture, please. The compact disc and the DVDs were home runs. We thought this one was going to be a home run. Up until the early 1980s, all 5-gallon water bottles were made of glass. When you go into a doctor's office or a dentist's office or a professional's office and you see that 5-gallon water bottle, it's now all plastic. It's all our plastic. Because in the early 1980s, we tweaked the molecule of the polycarbonate so that it could hold its strength as it dripped down, just like molasses. And we could blow it out against the side walls of a mold, and we made these containers like the ones in the center. You see, they're absolute cylinders. We built a plant that could make those containers, and we prototyped those containers to the 100 or so bottled water makers in the United States. They loved it because it was 6 pounds lighter than the glass bottle they were using, and it was unbreakable. We very quickly filled up the float of plastic 5-gallon water bottles in the United States. A home run. The problem was, your customers are smarter than you are, Jay. The first thing that happened was they began spending money for their own molds, and here you see a bottle where they've molded in a handle on the left-hand side of that right-hand bottle. That way, their delivery people could carry 2 bottles, since they now only weighed 41 pounds instead of 47 pounds. They could carry 2 bottles at a time instead of 1 bottle on their shoulders. That didn't hurt us at all, but the next thing that happened did. On the left, you see a water bottle with a belt up here at the top and kind of a belt down at the bottom. By putting those belts on, the bottles failed to rub against each other in the delivery truck, and they did not deface their cosmetic surfaces over time. They tended to last forever. So that since the 1990s, the sale level for this particular plastic into this application has greatly decreased. So what I thought was a home run ended up being a triple. But it was still a classic story on how you develop a market, substitute another material, develop your own plastic so no other plastic can do this particular job, and then sell into that application. Next picture, please. I'm sorry, what is it?
The casket.
Oh, yes. Two stories here. Caskets are made by primarily 3 companies in southern Indiana. What we did was we decided to sell the off-color and off-spec polycarbonate that we made. Sometimes we would make a color and the customer would stop taking it. Like when AT&T stopped making Princess phones and no longer needed Princess pink push-button dials. We had a lot of pink inventory. So the different colored inventories we would sell to people like Batesville Casket, who used it to make the casket hardware that you see along the side. They could do it because after molding the plastic part, they would sputter chrome it, that is, put a metallic-like finish on it to make it appear to be either bronze or gold or silver, bronze being the most popular. Well, I noticed in our sales data that our sales were lagging in the second and third calendar quarters in southern Indiana. So I called up our salesman and I said, Russ, our sales are way down versus what they were in the first quarter and in the prior year's fourth quarter. Are we losing market share to GE or Dow or the Italians or the Japanese? He said, Jay, we're not losing any market share. So then, being a wise guy, I said, well, Russ, are you telling me that death is a seasonal business? And he said, Jay, believe it or not, it is. He said, you'll see that in the winter months, you'll see more residential fires. You'll have deaths by pneumonia, deaths by flu, deaths by hypothermia, homeless people staying outside, and deaths by slip and falls on ice and auto accidents. But that's not the biggest spike. The biggest spike in death occurs between Thanksgiving and New Year's, as surviving widows and widowers find it emotionally very difficult to get through that first holiday season without their spouses. I began to read the obituaries, and he, in fact, is right. So I learned not to be such a wise guy. The other lesson here is many other plastics could have served this same need. The trick was getting in there and convincing these folks to use our plastic, because different plastics shrink at different rates in their molds. When you freeze water, it expands. When you freeze plastic, it shrinks. When plastic goes from liquid to solid, it shrinks. And different plastics shrink by different amounts. All the user cares about is what's the finished dimension. So you size your mold so that after the shrinkage, the part is exactly the right size. This is why it pays to do so much market development, as we have shown here. Okay. At this point, I decided to leave the biochemical company and move to a smaller company based in Cleveland, Ohio. Show the next slide. The trade press had it featured. I joined Faro Corporation in Cleveland as head of their global plastics business. This was a business that was about $275 million in sales, 600 people, 12 plants around the world in Europe, South America, the United States. We made 3 different types of products. Next slide, please. We had a product which we called Master Batch. The advantage to customers was, instead of buying a lot of different colored inventory, a silo of blue, a silo of red, a silo of green, a silo of yellow, they could buy a hopper car of non-colored pellets from one of the large chemical manufacturers, and they could buy a highly pigmented pellet from us that had about 10 times as much pigment in it as you'd like to have. That way they would have a small inventory of red, a small inventory of blue, a small inventory of yellow, and when they wanted to make a red cup or a blue cup, they would take 1 pellet of our master batch and combine it with 10 pellets of the non-colored material and make a red or a blue or a green. It was a money-saving idea for them and a good business for us. We had many customers around the country. One of them was Solo Cup. I'm sure you've seen their cups. You've probably used them for summer picnics. Some are red, some are blue, some are different colors. Those colors are all imparted by our master batches. But we had one plant that was highly unusual. Instead of using the traditional plastics like polyethylene, polystyrene, polypropylene, it used silicone. There weren't many customers in the United States who wanted to make multiple articles, the same article, out of silicone, but have it be different colors. So I went to the small plant to find out who our customers were and what they bought. I went in and I said to the plant manager, I said, Joe, what does our largest customer buy? He said, well, you're not going to believe this. He says, our largest customer is a company in Long Island that makes sex toys out of silicone. Well, I'm a wise guy. I couldn't resist asking the question, Joe, what's the largest color we sell them? He said, Jay, you're not going to believe this. It's glow-in-the-dark purple. Different strokes for different folks, indeed. Next picture, please. Another of our products was called Gel Coat. This is basically a coating that you put on the hulls of pleasure boats, both small and large. Everything below the deck here is painted with gel coat. The gel coat makes the hull more hydrodynamic and also protects it from dings and bangs from small things like floating logs in the water. More recently, a market has developed in giant wind turbines. The blades of those wind turbines, and you've probably seen them in the Midwest, they're giant, 20-foot long blades. They're now coated with gel coats. We had 3 plants, one in Spain, one in France, and one in the United States to make this product. Next picture. And we also had a plant that took plastics and made the plastic stronger by adding fiberglass or mica or other inorganic fillers. This would change the properties of the plastic and give it more strength. For example, we worked with Maytag Corporation, and this is one of their washing machines. The interior, and I'm sorry you can't see it very well, instead of a steel drum, it's fiberglass polypropylene drum. We helped them design it. It removed weight, it eliminated corrosion, it made for less maintenance, and they were a very good customer of ours. The coating that you see on the outside is what they call powder coatings. It was made by another division of our company, Faro. and it's applied by a nozzle spraying a charged paint particle out into the air, and you put an opposite charge on the steel cabinet you're trying to paint. That charged particle will curve through the air, land on the steel cabinet. That's what you see as the white surface here. That's why you don't see any brush marks on appliances. They're all powder coated. No powder is wasted. There's no overspray. This is important because as part of my job, I was given the assignment to oversee all of the company's plants in Asia. One of my fellow vice presidents was given Europe, and another one was given South America. But I took Asia because I thought that's where the growth is, and it's a rather exotic place to visit. From 1996 to 2002, I visited Asia about 4 times a year. 3 months into that job, we learned from Maytag that they were going to relocate a plant into China and make appliances there to take advantage of the cheaper labor cost. And they wanted us there to supply materials to them. That meant we had 6 months to buy or build a plant to produce powder coatings somewhere in China. I got the assignment to find out how to do it and get it done. So I went to the company that made the spray nozzles that sprayed the powder coatings, and from them I learned who were the 100 companies in China that made powder coatings, and who were all the customers that used powder coatings. That allowed us to figure out where the plant should be built or bought. It also allowed us to take a look at who are the best possible powder coatings companies if we have to purchase one, and we did because it was too late to build a plant. So I looked at 9 companies, negotiated with 2 companies, and ended up buying 1 company. The company was in Ningbo, China, which is about 75 miles southwest of Shanghai. It's a town of 2 million people that you never heard of. When I visited the plant for the first time, I saw water buffalo grazing in a reed pond next to the plant. I entered the plant, and I fell in love with the place right away. The owner of the plant was a 40-year-old entrepreneurial Chinese named Mr. Ying, a real go-getter. What he'd done was he'd built a 4-story high administration building, and on the 4th floor, he had a 1970s style discotheque. Black lacquer floor, rotating crystal ball, disc jockey booth, big screen up here, a moving crystal light in the floor. And once a month, he had all of his single employees come in for a party. The party was kind of a combination of a junior high sock hop and a 1950s TV game show. He divided all the people into 4 teams. The winning team would eventually all win prizes that particular night. But he used it to try to introduce his male and female employees. It was very interesting. We bought the place. I phoned Cleveland, talked to my boss, and said, okay, we're ready to go. I bought a place. He said, what'd you pay? I said, somewhere between $6 million and $15 million. He said, can't you give me a better idea? And I said, no, I can't, because this company does not keep its books according to Western standards. It'll take us at least 2 months to redo their books using our global accounting firm, KPMG. Their office was in Shanghai. And I said, I've agreed to pay the guy 2 times the net worth of his company, whatever that turns out to be. He said, okay. Well, it turned out we ended up paying $8.5 million for the company. And when we closed the deal, we had a banquet in the town's biggest hotel. We invited 200 guests, everybody from the mayor to the dog catcher, to all the managers of the company and their wives, and Mr. Ying and his Chinese wife. Unbeknownst to my colleagues, I prepared a speech in Mandarin. And after a number of kampai drinks, where they're drinking one-on-one with you, I had had 6 drinks before they had had 2. I gave my speech in Mandarin, and I got through it, and many of the men in the audience understood it, and they were translating it into the local dialect for their wives. But it was a lot of fun. I had learned to speak it because I knew I had an accounting employee who spoke Mandarin. She learned it at Ohio State. I gave her an English language speech. She translated it into phonetic Mandarin, and I listened to that tape in my car for a month and eventually learned it. But it was a great experience. China was really something.
Jay,
Yes?
you only have 6 minutes left. Do you want to show the...
Oh,
Yeah, do you want to show the
I'm sorry, okay. Then I moved on to another company. I left Faro Corporation in Cleveland and moved to a company that had 7 plants, $150 million in sales, and worked with a unique plastic that was very slippery to the touch. We called it the poor man's Teflon. It didn't have the heat resistance of Teflon, and you couldn't use it to coat your baking pans, but it was very slippery. And now we have the slide.
Yes, it's up there.
Okay, what you see here are 2 artificial knees. The artificial knee on the right shows the device inside the human leg, and the arrow is pointing to a piece of black plastic that was mine. We used the plastic to simulate the cartilage in the knee, so that the 2 metal shanks that go into your upper leg and lower leg don't rub against each other. It simulates the cartilage in your knee. It's also used in artificial hips. To the left, you see an artificial knee disassembled, and you can see the small plastic part in the center. That's our material. So if you had an artificial knee or an artificial hip implanted between 2001 and 2005, you've got my plastic in your body. Unsettling, isn't it? Okay, in my travels, I visited 65 countries. I met many famous people. I spent a lot of time in airport lounges, on planes, and in hotels. Among the people I met were Itzhak Perlman, the concert violinist, Billy Crystal, the stand-up comedian, Henry Kissinger, Secretary of State, Jackie Kennedy Onassis, former First Lady, and Mike Ditka, Super Bowl winning coach of the Chicago Bears. Bonnie, do I have any time?
No, not really. It's about 3 minutes.
Okay, I'll tell you at least about 2 of them. When I went to Washington as an attorney, I had a case before the Federal Trade Commission, and I was staying at the Mayflower Hotel. When I went down to get the morning newspaper at the end of the evening, I reached for the Washington Post, and a tuxedoed arm reached for it at the same time. I stepped back and said, "You take it, I'll get the next one." Turned out to be Henry Kissinger. I was dumbfounded. He walked around the lobby, around the elevator. I walked around the lobby the other way, and we ended up getting in the same elevator car with one other person, Nancy McGinnis, the redhead whom he was dating at the time. You'll remember Henry was quite the ladies' man. He was also dating the actress Jill St. John in Hollywood. We rode up 12 floors. I didn't know what to say to Henry. He was busy negotiating with the Vietnamese the shape of the peace table, the conference table, to try and negotiate an end to the Vietnamese War, but I didn't have anything to say. Jackie Kennedy, can you show her picture? This is exactly as I saw Jackie Kennedy. Is that Jackie?
Yeah.
She had on her black sunglasses, her black sweater, the typical, she might as well have been wearing a neon sign saying, "I'm Jackie Kennedy." She had a Secret Service guy with her. He had the thing in his ear and the black tie and the black suit and the black sunglasses. He escorted her onto the plane. She sat in the first row of the first class. I had been awarded a first class seat by my boss after I'd spent 2 months in Germany. He figured I'd earned it. So I came back and I was sitting in the second row, right behind Jackie Kennedy. The seat next to her was left vacant. She beckoned the stewardess to come over, and she told her in a very loud voice, "I don't intend to be disturbed on this flight. Is that all right?" Well, of course, that was for the benefit of us passengers. We weren't to disturb her. She kept her glasses on the whole flight to New York. She was the first one off the plane. She was met by Secret Service, and on the gangplank, she was met by her daughter, Caroline. These were the days before 9/11. Anybody could get to the airport gate. My most interesting story, though, was Itzhak Perlman, the concert violinist. We shared a flight to Tokyo from San Francisco. He kept his violin at his feet. He wouldn't trust it in the overhead bin. I'm sure it was a Stradivarius or something similar. We talked, we exchanged pleasantries, we talked a little bit about what we did. He let me know that he had a lot of musical scores to study, and I had to prepare my notes for visits to Japan, China, and Taiwan on that trip. But midway in the flight, we noticed a beautiful brunette walking up and down the aisles. She had a gorgeous smile, beautiful long hair. She was casual dressed, but she was wearing 4-inch high heels, walking up and down, making eye contact with every male passenger with a broad smile on her face. And at the end of the aisle, she would do a crisp about face on one of her high heels and walk back in the other direction. We wondered what was going on. Just before the plane landed, she ducked back into the galley, and 2 of the stewardesses put a cocktail dress on her and a sash from her left shoulder to her right hip reading Miss Venezuela. She was getting off the plane as one of the 85 contestants in Donald Trump's Miss Universe contest. Unfortunately for her, what she didn't recognize was she had little chance of winning, even though she certainly got the votes of Mr. Perlman and myself. It seems that Donald Trump personally picked 10 of the 15 semifinalists, and he picked them from countries where he was doing business or wanted to do business. The whole thing had to do with pushing the Trump brand. So if you were Miss Scotland or Miss Panama or Miss Russian, you were in the semifinals. If you were Miss Venezuela, no chance. Okay, listen, I want to thank you for sharing all these good memories with me. I've really enjoyed it. I think we have enough time for a few Q's, and if you're lucky, maybe even an A or two. Lee?
6 o'clock.
I'm sorry, what time is it?
6.
6 o'clock.
Oh, yeah, geez.
It
I'm
happens
sorry.
all the time, Jay.
I'm sorry.
Thank you, Jay. Thank you. That was terrific. That's wonderful. We all have a story, so if you'd like to tell your story, come see me, please. Thank you. And our next speaker is Bill Buddha, who will be speaking in September. You remember Bill from the 4th of July presentation, and he's going to be speaking about his life as a attorney, a judge. Okay. So come and plan on seeing Bill the second Monday of the month. And another big hand for Jay.